My purpose in going through this history is to begin to think at the level of trying to get a picture of how this child called human society has now become an adolescent and how we grew up over time. So we start with the hunter-gatherers. So back then we would walk around and get berries, and population density was very, very low. And we worshiped the elements, we worshiped the seasons, because we needed to know when to migrate from one place to the other. It was a matter of survival. And so the religion, paganism, was born. And information was encoded about the seasons. It was a matter of survival, the sun and the moon. Everything seemed like magic to us, and the gods were a way for us to feel like we had some sense of control. We worshiped the gods because we didn't want to feel like we had no control. And we worshiped the female. The female was magical. Life came from females. Food, we ate a lot of females, nuts and berries and so on. And as time went on, density increased, and we discovered agricultural and animal husbandry. And then the male suddenly got power because we suddenly realized we had to defend our territory. It was easier to steal food from other people than create your own. The first looters appeared. So the male warrior came about. And then we encoded laws. Our biggest enemy at this point was not nature, it was other people. So what are some of the laws we encoded? For example, one of them was adultery. They didn't want men fighting over women. Another one was homosexuality. It wasn't a moral issue. We needed people. We needed to reproduce because people died a lot. It was a very practical issue. Then as time went on and we grew, we created societies. We started building great monuments. The Greeks, the Romans, we created games. At first it was political. Then it was to worship the gods. And then it was, when the Romans came along, it was to distract people. Sound familiar? We built pyramids. We needed slaves. We had to justify those slaves. We encoded slavery and the justification for it in our religious text. It was ordained by God. We created armies. The state owned the power of religion, and the state was all very much combined. Then organized religion came about. First Judaism, then Catholicism. But let me focus on Christianity. Christianity didn't come from God. It came from tyranny. The Romans were brutal. So by creating Christianity, by creating hope, by creating a God, we banded people together. We put the fear of hell into the Roman centurions. The Romans were going to hell and we were going to heaven. It made a lot of sense. That was the first globalization of a mindset, of a diaspora, of people who believed in something bigger than them. It was a spiritual revolution. And remember, a lot of the rules came from paganism. We know that now, but back then they didn't know that. Then the Roman Empire fell, thankfully, due to religion, and interestingly enough, embraced Christianity as the Holy Roman Empire. Then we descended into the Dark Ages. And now, years later, religion finally became a tool for individuals to get power. At first, it made a lot of sense. Take out the Roman Empire, get rid of all that brutality, create a diaspora of people thinking at a broader level. But then when the Roman Empire fell, we regressed into the feudal system, where in order to survive, you wanted to have the protection of the king and so on. The religion was used as a tool to control people through fear and through, for example, the Crusades. For example, in the French, there was a war in France. When the war was over, they had an army of all these aggressive men, and the politicians were worried that the army would turn on them. So they created an enemy, the Crusades. They sent them off to Jerusalem. So in this environment of the Middle Ages, was lasted for a long time, you couldn't build anything. You couldn't trust anybody. How could you build a society? How could you create science? How could you create schools? How could you create anything? So we stagnated for many, many years. The Renaissance happened. It was still controlled by the church, but the idea there was that the church and religion was important. It was an important pyramid. Even the most cynical person can't deny that. It really established the patronage for the sciences and the arts, allowed the Da Vinci's and the Galileos to come along in science and art and thinking to take our evolution to another step. Then the merchant class came out of that environment. And at that point, our society began to shift towards capitalism. But there was an old system in place. The religion and the kings were still there. So the secret society, the Freemasons, helped to shepherd capitalism along that transition that we had talked about earlier, from a religious pyramid to a capitalist pyramid in secret. So what are some of the conclusions from human history? Traditions are very important. Some of them are not relevant, but they give us a level of comfort. Some of us are actually meaningful, make a lot of sense. There's a lot of greatness in religion in addition to nonsense. Religion was a reaction to tyranny. And today, that's no longer true, but it's still a great opportunity for two things. One is to provide good services for people and also to control people. So it's actually quite important for our population. And also people use it as a good analgesic to feel like they're part of something important, which is really good. Everybody wins. And so the interesting thing to remember is that, as Jung said, everything becomes the opposite of what it was meant to be. Religion was a tool against tyranny. And the irony, really, today is that it's a tool for a form of tyranny, which is control. And so really, if you think about the founding principles of religion, the exercise of it today is pretty much the opposite. Religion's founding principles were about finding God inside of yourself, discovering, asking questions, whereas today it's sort of evolved or de-evolved into finding God outside of yourself, being spoon-fed religion. It was about not worshiping false gods, and we've created all these symbols that we worship. They said no false idolatry. They weren't meaning a physical idol made out of white marble. They meant money, pictures, consumerism, symbols of God. And the irony is we're all doing that, or very much of us are. Founding principles: treat others as yourself. We've rejected other people and humiliated them or killed them. That's the way it is. We don't try to change that. We're real careful with the religion. The idea is to not be a false prophet. What our objective here is to segment the market and understand the different people and how we can actually use them to control the system. Those who are dogmatic religious are very, very easy to control. Large voting blocks. Very powerful. So the idea is to work with their leaders. Those who are highly spiritual, we don't want a new religion being formed right now. That would really disrupt things. A lot of spirituality is being found on the internet where people are joining up with people like them. And the idea is to have many different factions of that and occasionally fund different groups that promote different forms of that through various back channels. And you create so much noise that none of them have an opportunity to really get together. And then occasionally we want to create or promote a religious leader who's completely full of garbage to turn people off to religion. Because in general, religion is something that could be very powerful in terms of our ability to control voter blocks, but it also could turn into something really spiritual. So we generally, when possible, every once in a while, want to turn people off to it. So every 10 years or so, we inject a religious leader who's just so horrible, he just turns everybody off to it. Very important strategy. But the key thing here is we generally want to stay back from that, because being a false prophet is the worst sin in the Bible. So whether or not you believe in the Bible or not, we generally try to avoid that kind of thing.